Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome back to the Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn, and I am very excited to say that I'm joined by Dominick Albano, who is a Catholic husband, father, writer, speaker, fellow podcaster. I would go and read on the back of your book that I'm holding in my hand, but I'll hold off on that and instead say thank you for joining me and ask you to please introduce yourself to the listeners.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to come on the show. My name's Dominick. I live in the Cincinnati area. I actually live in Kentucky, but Cincinnati is one of those weird cities that kind of spans over two states. So, I did
not know that.
It is, yeah. I live in Kentucky, but it's easier to say that I live in Cincinnati. The Cincinnati airport is actually in the state of Kentucky. It's a little bit of trivia for you there.
St. Louis is kind of a city like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay,
St. Louis, Kansas City, they're all kind of like that.
Yeah.
I'm married for I think 12 years now. Yeah, a little over 12 years now.
Just as long as you get that straight by the time the next anniversary comes.
Exactly. For about 3 weeks a year, I have to really remember what that is because it's important as the anniversary approaches. But I've been married just over 12 years. My wife, Dr. Rebecca Albano, she has her PhD in neuroscience, and so it's important to know that I'm married up. And we have four boys, four boys who are 10 and under. So basically, a constant state of chaos in my house. And I get to do some writing, some public speaking. I do parish missions, that sort of thing. And my day job is as a director of digital engagement for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. So paying attention to how the Archdiocese communicates with the 500,000 Catholics and then everyone else within the Cincinnati area. So that's kind of a brief overview. I don't know if there's anything else you want to ask specifically. I'd be happy to answer it. But
did you have you always worked for the Archdiocese? I mean, in the past, is that the main thing on your resume? I should ask.
No. What a complicated question. Or it probably isn't a complicated question for most people. So I, kind of three big stages. I lived in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee for a long time.
Hey, that's where I am.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm in Waukesha.
No way.
Yep.
Well, that's crazy.
I just moved here 7 months ago.
Oh, my gosh. So have you ever heard of Arise?
Yeah.
So I founded Arise.
No kidding.
There you go. So small.
I didn't see that. I looked into you. I didn't see that name. I would have noticed that.
Small world. Yeah, I founded Arise Missions in Milwaukee, and that was a big turning point. And that for listeners who don't know, is a very kind of parish mission based ministry, praise and worship, adoration, reconciliation, very evangelical, and I mean that not in the sense of evangelical churches, but in the sense of we were trying to reach the people that normal church events don't reach. And then in 2015, January 2016, I joined Matt Kelly's organization, Dynamic Catholic. That's what brought me down here to Cincinnati. So I spent about 3 years writing and speaking for them, and then started working for the Archdiocese about a year ago. So kind of moved around a little bit, and kind of trying to do whatever the Holy Spirit asks you to do, which is always a little bit of a challenge. It's always easier to see how the Spirit moves in retrospect than it is to see where the Spirit is moving. But
that is the truth.
Yeah, those are kind of the three main
So
aspects.
I'm guessing on your age, but if that's the case, have you always been a Catholic? Are you a lifelong?
Well, that's an interesting question because I So yes, I have always been Catholic. I was baptized, born into a Catholic family, baptized Catholic, First Holy Communion, all that deal. But faith was not very important to us growing up. And when I was 9, my parents got divorced. And my mom, this was in the 90s, and the church just wasn't super great at divorced ministry and helping someone in that situation. And she didn't feel, she found a great divorce ministry at another Christian church. And so she actually started going to this Lutheran church. And, at 9, it was like, okay, we're going to this other church now. I didn't really get it at all. But I was actually confirmed in the Lutheran church. And then I ended up going to a Catholic high school because for the simple reason that my older sister went there, and she went there because she was recruited to play there for basketball. So anyone who gets on Catholic schools for they put too much emphasis on sports and recruiting, I basically probably wouldn't be Catholic today if it weren't for this Catholic school recruiting my sister to play basketball there. But I went to this Catholic school and ended up meeting some friends who were, had a youth group and went on retreats with them. And that's kind of how I had my conversion in high school. So in a roundabout way, I've always been Catholic, but it also takes some blips on the radar with some other churches as well.
Sure. When my husband and I were going through our conversions, we went from spiritual but not religious to skeptic, and Lutheran was the step in that we took. And as we were there, we're like, oh, this is almost like Catholic light.
It's diet Catholic, yeah.
Yeah. So, we both had Catholic backgrounds of some sort. My extended family is all Catholic. So, okay. But it didn't feel as drawing. I grew up in the South, and there's a huge difference between, say, a Baptist church and going to a Lutheran one. And the Lutheran one always felt a little bit closer than to a Catholic mass, but it's not the real deal.
No. There's obviously there's some very important aspects that are very different, but in other ways, it's not that far off. So
yeah. Well, and then the book came, which is, I should say, the book is called The Fundamental Theory of Happiness: How to Find Your Purpose and Be More Joyful. And we were just talking about this before I hit record, how just tasty of a cover it is, since it has this partially melted ice cream cone on it that just looks ripe for the eating.
Yeah, I really care about, my heart in ministry is really for the people who are not already in our pews. And maybe it's because, my mom is a very faithful Catholic once again, but no one in my family, the faith is not, they're all very good people, but the faith is not important to them in the same way as it is to me. And just growing up, I had a lot of different experiences around that. And so a lot of my friends and a lot of my family, I feel like they need the gospel. And so often in my life and ministry, I've looked at, I've always worked for the church, and there's been events, or there's been books, or there's been, even music and stuff where I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is not something I can invite my fallen away father to, or I can invite my brother to, or my sister to, or my best friend to. And that really came to a head when I was running a Rise, and we were planning for a Steubenville conference, that a young adult conference that we were helping run. And we were doing a planning meeting, and somebody was suggesting this, it's for young adults. It's really for college students. And at the time, my sister-in-law was a college student at UW Milwaukee. So, target audience right there. I care very much about this. And they were kind of going through these topics that I was like, if these are the topics that we cover in this retreat, I can't invite her. It's not for her anymore. And I didn't want to do ministry for that. I wanted to do something that's for, that kind of a person. So the Fundamental Theory of Happiness is written for someone who isn't, super faithful, who maybe needs to be, introduced to God, and is not saying it's they're bad people, but just they don't get it, or it's not as big a part of their life, or however you would want to phrase that. And so part of that is putting this really, I operated from this standpoint of they would not want to read a Catholic book. Every step of the way, you're going to have to convince them. And so, you got to put an ice cream cone on the cover, because at least everybody likes ice cream,
I know, because even got strawberry Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? No, even the lactose intolerant love ice cream.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. And I do like, I mean, clearly the book, as you're reading it, is, faith filled. But you also have, I know your wife helped with the neuroscience part. I mean, it shows that this isn't just, like I came from a skeptical background. So my idea of anybody who is faithful was very, like you had to choose between being intelligent and being faithful, if I'm going to be honest, how I used to think.
Yep.
And so it's great to see that, you combine the science and you can combine the feelings and real life and wind up with a really cool way of looking at things. And I like that, you made the distinction that theory, we're not talking about, like a one-off scientific theory, but like music theory or art theory, this way of living. Yeah.
Just this idea that, there's two types of theory. There's like A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And then there's like art theory, and happiness. I think God created us for happiness. He gave us a desire for happiness, because if you relentlessly and honestly pursue happiness, you can't end anywhere. You can't end up anywhere but back at Him. But that path isn't that first kind of theory. It's not it's not A plus B equals C. It's more of, there's a little bit of an art to it. So, but we also wanted to use the science. We wanted to use the intellect and say all of this contributes. And my wife was gracious enough to help me find some like good, reputable research, because there's a lot. I mean, if you search what will make me happy into Google, you're going to find a lot of weird stuff out there. And so I wanted to make sure it was like, all right, well, let's get some legitimate, universities and some legitimate studies, and then combine that with the faith. And faith and reason are not at odds; they're complementary. And let's show that through this book. So
yeah, well, I definitely could see that as I was reading through it.
Yeah,
and I like your like the little activities that you had in there to make sure that people were paying attention. Those are good. I like that, because it made me stop and think. Like, oh yeah, and I just started flipping through the book last week, and already I've noticed as I'm going about my day that I'm remembering things that I read.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Praise
Very
God.
cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I, if I can make a confession, I'm like the kind of person who, when I read a book, I will frequently have to go back and reread sections, or even like I'll reread a paragraph like 5 or 6 times because my mind just wanders that easily. So that's why I was like, all right, let's just like make sure these are really short chapters, short sections, lots of like little things to keep your attention, because I need that. I'm like ADD enough that could be a problem for me. So I wanted to make sure it was a really easy read for people.
Yeah. Well, especially nowadays where people don't typically read as much, they probably need some extra help anyway. Keep their focus. And I really liked that you made that distinction early on in the book, that there's a difference between being happy and feeling happy. And I don't know if you can talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, everybody, we want both, right? And the easy answer that Catholics will like to give about happiness is like, well, you don't really want to be happy or feel happy. You want to be joyful. And it's this idea that like, well, you're really going to feel miserable. Like, let's be honest. But like, hopefully you'll have some sort of virtuous inner glow that'll make you feel happy about the fact that you actually feel miserable or something. And I think that that's like a very unsatisfying answer, because the truth is we want both. Like, I want to feel happy and I want to be happy. And if we can look at the situations of our lives with honesty, right? A college student who like sleeps around, like goes to a party, goes out, has a one-night stand, they feel very happy in the moment, and they will not be happy the next day. That's a reality that we all face. I mean, and it's not just with sex. It's like if you drink in the you get like super drunk that night, you feel great, and you are not very happy the next morning, and you don't feel happy. And of course there is like a place for suffering too, in our faith, but like there's this idea of like feeling happy and then being happy. Feeling happy is easy, right? Like you eat an ice cream cone, you're going to feel happy. You drink, you're going to feel happy. You do all this, there's no shortage of that. And our world offers no shortage of that. And so clearly when people are asking this question of like, well, what's going to make me happy? they're looking for something deeper, and that deeper is being happy, and being happy and feeling happy are two different things. You can be happy without feeling happy. The truth is, for most of us, we want both. I want to feel happy and be happy. But that's just the topic that really dive into, is what it means to really be happy versus feeling happy. So,
yeah. I feel like I've made a transition fully into a Catholic mother because my son was saying something. He was bored or something. I told him he could offer that suffering up. Oh, it's happened. I did it.
I feel like you ever read the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes? That was one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, I saw that in there. I was very excited when I saw that.
That's actually probably the book that, like, the part of the book I'm most proud of is the fact that we got a Calvin and Hobbes comic strip into the book. But anyways, you know how the dad, Calvin's dad is always like, well, it's good for you. It builds character.
Right.
I feel like my kids someday are going to be like, oh, Dad, he's always telling us to offer it up.
Then you can tell him to go read Calvin and Hobbes and you'll know.
Yeah.
It's like the Catholic Calvin and Hobbes dad. There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that comic strip.
It really was like highly influential for me growing up. Which, I am not like a casual fan. Like, I've probably read, literally every individual like daily strip hundreds of times in my life, without exaggeration. So it's if you like Calvin and Hobbes, that's like basically I'm like a 34-year-old version of Calvin, I think.
Do you still talk to a stuffed animal?
Ooh,
no, you don't have to.
I need to plead the fifth on that one.
It's funny. I was in Costco the other day, and they had, I don't know, maybe an anniversary edition of a lot of the books all in one, and it was like $30-some. I was like, I could get this, and then I realized my mom would probably be happier if I asked her to send me all the Calvin and Hobbes books that are still sitting there waiting for me to claim them from her house.
Yeah, right.
Man, yeah, that's such a good comic. So how long did this whole process of writing the book go? Did you have an idea that you wanted to write this and it just took a while, or was this like, man, we woke up one day, I'm doing this?
It was a pretty long process, to be honest. I there was a part of me that always wanted to be a writer. That was like a dream that, I wrote like a book when I was in like 5th grade. That was basically a rip-off of everything from my favorite Batman movie and The Never-Ending Story. And I remember like telling people that year, like, oh, I'm gonna be a writer when I grow up. And then, real life hits you and you forget these things. And then probably sometime, I'd say about like 6 or 7 years ago, was when things were like really rekindled. And I wrote a book and it was garbage, and I literally like tossed the whole thing. I was like, this isn't good. And so it really was a long process to define, like, the idea, the nugget was there of like, how would you get someone who was fallen away from the faith? Let's say like they're Catholic in name, they were raised in the Catholic faith, probably went to mass, but like like in high school because their parents made them, maybe went to Catholic school, but hasn't gone to hasn't gone to mass in years, and basically thinks like, I've given Catholicism a shot, and it's got nothing to offer me. Like, what would make that person just like take one step back towards the faith? Like, say, okay, I'll give this thing another look. That was kind of like my initial prompt, and it was like 4 years. From that, the actual writing, was about. I submitted to the publisher, to multiple publishers, about a year ago now. So like December of 2018. So the actual publishing process took like a year, and I probably wrote it over the year before that. So, it is a long, grueling process. It is a ton of time. It's a ton of work. And you get paid very little for it. So,
royalties don't give you a bunch of money? No.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like a labor of love. But I know you obviously talk a lot about the kids, right? Like, my kids will always have that book on their shelves, or I hope, or they'll always be able to go find it. Thanks to the wonders
Dad wrote.
Yeah, exactly. Our like it becomes, I hope, maybe like a little part of the legacy,
Sure. Yeah, my husband is a published author, and talk about the different. I mean, he is happy that he did the book, but while he was writing it, he felt happy, and neither did I. It was a lot of work, and man, I read it a lot of times for him too. So, yeah, I would say we are generally happy that the book got written, but as far as feeling happy, I'm feeling happy over.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a great example. Like it did not feel happy. I mean, I left every night, Monday through Thursday night. I would leave the house. I'd put the kids to bed, and I would drive to Starbucks, and I would sit at Starbucks and write for like 3 hours, and I would do that 4 nights a week. Wow. And sometimes I'd do Sunday nights add in there. I tried not to on Friday night or Saturday night ever, but it was like doing that for, I don't know, 6 months, 7 months, very consistently. And that's just like, yeah, I mean, it's a slog, it's you really, you just kind of have to put your nose down and say, I'm going to do this. But it's worth it in the end. I'm happy.
Yeah. Well, good.
And that's, exactly. That's the book, I'm happy it happened. So,
yeah. So it's very cool. Like I mentioned earlier. And
I mean, I would have never gotten to meet you or talk to you had I not written the book. So obviously
everybody's happy now.
Everyone's happy now.
Well, I love that the book, it's not like some typical how-to book. It really, I love the anecdotes in there. You're right. It's an easy read. It flows through, and then you get to, have ideas on how to implement everything that you're saying. And you're right. Like if it has a very Catholic feel to it. And I love that you were just trying to pull somebody, one step closer. Was that, in your whole ministry, I guess, then your focus is just to try to get somebody to take a second look or a third look or whatever they need at.
Yeah. Even when I do like parish missions and whatnot, and I know that I'm getting mostly like quote unquote the choir. I still am very much focused on, how you get that person who's, that's who I'm like, that's who my heart's breaking for, is that one person in the crowd who's like, I got nothing to do tonight. And I saw this flyer that whatever might as well. Like, that's really who I'm like speaking to and who I'm always reaching out for.
Well, they need it, man. Cause I how many times I've heard since converting, whether this person is still Catholic or not, they say, if say they went to Catholic school, I went to Catholic school, I learned everything I needed to know. Well, that could have been 20, 30, 40 years ago. You wouldn't say that like, I played basketball 40 years ago, then I don't need anything else. I'm good. I know everything I can about basketball, and I still know it this many years later.
Right.
But when it comes to, you tried on Catholicism once, and you're good,
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like you wouldn't say that about anything else, but faith is. Oh, and I have a baby in my lap too. Faith is a skill, right? Like you have to keep exploring it and developing it. And so much. You're not going to ever run out of things to learn about the Catholic faith.
And the faith is never going to be. There's going to be no part of your life that the faith is not applicable to, and yet we don't do a great job as a church of helping people understand that the faith can speak into the very important things in their lives and make those aspects of their lives better. And that's part of my mission and my belief is that the church can speak powerfully into your finances, into your marriage, into the way you raise your kids, into your health, into your, into all these different aspects of life. Into your happiness, and yet we tend to like we hit like a couple notes, we hit them over and over again, and so it makes people feel like, well, I've gotten everything that Catholicism has to offer, and I've still got all these other parts of my life, and I got to figure out what that's going to be like. Instead of like, oh no, the church can actually speak powerfully into that. We've got something to say. We can help you live your best life in that aspect of your life. Let's talk about that. We have a lot of Catholic content out there, but we don't always hear Catholics speaking about, just we hear a lot of like theology and a lot of catechesis, and we don't just hear like a lot of practical life stuff. So,
Yeah, and like I say, coming from a convert's perspective, everything had a shift as I became Catholic. So yeah, you have these broad strokes of what the faith is and the commandments, but when you really start to understand and live the faith, it has to change everything.
Yeah, well, and that's if we really want to go deep, it's if you really get a heart for the people who are falling away, you start thinking about the ways life has to change based on the faith, and it gets really complicated because sin gets very complicated, and the longer you've been away, the deeper sin gets rooted into someone's life, the harder it is. Like, the more God's got to be active, the more grace has to be at play to like pull those people out. If you've got a guy who has been married, multiple times, he's been divorced multiple times, he's married to this, however wife that he wasn't married to at the church, and he's got, kids with her, and then he's got stepkids from the other, like all of a sudden, it's not like, when I was 14 and I had my conversion, and it was like, oh, I guess I got to stop looking at porn now. Like, that was pretty easy, compared to, oh, like, do I have to leave the woman I'm married to now because I'm actually not married to her? They can get really complicated.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that's where, like, we really need grace, and we really need, because there's so many people who I think sin gets so rooted deep into their lives that even if they started having those initial thoughts about conversion, they could so quickly get choked out by, I can't even imagine how to change my life to conform it to the gospel. So I guess I'm screwed.
So when you speak, say with if you're doing like parish missions or just missionary work in general, when you speak to people who have fallen away, do you give them like a nudge towards, say, confession or something? Like what's like the next step that you usually try to encourage them towards?
Community. So normally I'm speaking to, like when I'm speaking to a parish, let's say I assume that, so what else I'll speak about is the idea of helping, right? And the idea of good news, that evangelization is a big word that we Catholics really complicate. And we make it seem like it's such a big thing, and we're such a little thing. We're so little and it's so big. And I talk about the idea that evangelization, it just simply means sharing good news, right? It's good newsization. That's what we're trying to do. And, going to your neighbors who are, they've just had their first kid and saying like, hey, we got this thing going on at our parish. I'd love for you to come to this retreat we've got going on this weekend. That's not good news to them. They're like, are you kidding? I just came home with a newborn. But saying like, hey, I made you lasagna because I want you to be able to eat. That's actually good news to those people. And it's in these very simple ways that we can share good news into someone's life. And then it leads to, if you do that and you can go deeper and deeper with sharing good news, it leads to what I call like the golden moment of evangelization, which is someone saying, why do you do this? Or however they formulate the question, but it's some form of why. And then you get to share about your own faith. And that's, historically speaking, the faith has always been shared most powerfully from person to person. And that's, I think, in the modern world, it's no coincidence that Jesus said, love your neighbor. And I think that's how we have to do it. And as a church, we have to get back to just being really, really helpful. Because what's the best news someone can hear when they're hurting is, I'm here to help. And the church the church really grew through helping people. Historically, you think about the schools and you think about the hospitals and visiting the imprisoned and all the stuff that we have done as a church that helps people. I mean, even think about the example of Jesus, right? Like, he almost always served some sort of a human need. He was feeding people or healing people or helping them see or helping them walk before saying like, go and sin no more. And so I think parishes need to become places again where people feel really helped, and people feel really cared for and taken care of. And that's what leads, and then it leads to that question of why. It leads to that, leads them to Christ through that. And so in my parish missions, I'm always trying to help people understand that every one of us can share good news. And here's the different strategies for sharing good news in the people in your life, with your kids, with your coworkers, with your neighbors, with your extended family. And if you're one of those people, I want the events themselves to be, I want you to feel like you're hearing good news, and I want you to feel like you are going to get pulled in. And I want Parish to become a place where, new people are found, because that's a big thing. Is most parishes have no idea if someone new is there. They have no clue. In one of my parish missions, if I said to the pastor, "Hey, can you point out the people who are here and they're really on the fence, they're showing up, they're kind of a new person," they'd have no clue. So there's just some very simple things like that I work with parishes, and usually I'll do like an evangelization training, and like ahead of time before we do the parish mission. It gets complicated, but that's sorry, you got me on my soapbox. Got me on my soapbox.
Great.
I'm sorry.
But I know I never apologize.
All of a sudden I realize I've been talking for like 34 minutes straight after one question.
I think I love that that definite, or look at love your neighbor, because how many times I have heard loving your neighbor just means that you don't judge them, or you just leave them alone to do their own thing. Who are you to judge? But it fosters it's a laziness and a complacence. But to say to help others, that is that opens up ideas. It can inspire people of what loving actually means.
Well, I like to share the story at the parish missions. My uncle passed away very suddenly in the summer of 2017, I think it was. And, the week after he died, it was a very tragic situation. He was not, it was not like end of a long life. It was not, happy death that, he was young and it wasn't his time, and it was very sad. And my aunt was just heartbroken, just totally demolished. And she was not one who, again, great person. I love her to death, but like faith's not a huge part of her life in terms of going to mass. And, I don't know how she would describe herself, but she would probably fit most people's label of fallen away Catholic. And I'll never forget, the few days after my uncle had died, we had, 50 people at the house because all of his siblings and nephews and nieces, all these people had flown in from out of town. We're all staying at the house, trying to be there for my aunt. And we were sitting at her kitchen table, and the lawnmower, we heard the lawnmower going on outside. And we were all kind of like, what's going on? And we looked outside, and there was this neighborhood kid. And he was in college. He was home over break, and didn't know my uncle super well, but my uncle he was very friendly. He would always say hi to everybody. And this kid was the quarterback on my cousin's football team. And so they'd always talk about football when my, uncle was walking the dogs and stuff. And he found out what had happened. And he didn't send a lasagna. He didn't come down and offer any special words. But he got out his lawnmower and he walked down the street with his lawnmower and he mowed the yard. And everyone in my aunt's family talked about this kid and the hope. And my aunt specifically used this phrase of it was like God telling me that everything was going to be okay. And if God can speak to someone in that situation through some college kid's lawnmower, I think it demonstrates how powerfully God can speak through the notion of I'm here to help, and the good and what good news that is.
Yeah.
And I think as a church, we have an opportunity to build systems that can do that in a really powerful way.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That was really nice. And look at that. You're sharing the story, and your family's probably also talking about this, the couple of years afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
And look at how that, you're right. A lawnmower. Who would have thought that a kid in a lawnmower could have traveled? Now, who knows where somebody's listening to this podcast or anywhere else that you've told this story, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, we all can do a lot more than we think we can do.
That is very true.
And it's easy to get in a place where we don't think we can evangelize. We don't have the words. We don't have the education. We don't have the right answers. But when we can, kind of shift the paradigm to, but I can help,
Yeah.
And
it's more than just clicking a like button.
Oh,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we've all grown, pretty, we forget that there is something other than just scrolling through and liking something, and we can help in much greater ways. That isn't virtue signaling.
No, absolutely. I always tell, it's like parents have fallen away, adult, their children are adults and they've fallen away from the church, and that's like a big issue. And I'm like, you know what? Like, this is a big thing, and I get it. I can imagine. I won't say that I can totally get it, but I can imagine, like, what if my son was 25? What if we were talking about 15 years from now, and he had left the church? Like, that would be very hard. But go over twice a month and say to your son or your daughter, hey, I'm going to babysit. I'm going to take the kids. We're going to babysit tonight. They're going to spend the night at my house because I really want you and your spouse to have a really strong marriage. I want you guys to have a thriving marriage. I'm going to, free babysitter because I think that's really important. Like that, if they have a thriving marriage, God's going to be in that. You can't have a thriving marriage without God. That's going to be great news to them. Any parent,
amen.
Knows that's very, very good news. And I think those kind of things always do point you back towards God. So it's very, very simple ways that we can, share that good news and play the long game, because the truth is sharing the good news is our job, but conversion is God's job. And we like to get confused about that, right? We want to say, well, no, I'm going to give a talk, and people are going to fall out of their pews. They're going to be having such, intense experiences. They're going to be crying, and their hands are going to be in the air, and it's going to be immediate conversions and levitations and all kinds of crazy stuff. And the truth is God conversion is God's job. That's the Holy Spirit's job. And we're just there to share good news and not necessarily always to see the fruit of that. And that can be a challenge. So
right, yeah, you never know what actually comes from it. It could just be a seed that's planted that doesn't start to sprout for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of help, how can I help my listeners find you? Where is the best place to find Dominick Albano?
DominicAlbano.com. That's your best. Yeah, we try to keep it easy. Yeah, if they go to www.DominicAlbano.com, I've got my writing, some writing on there. I've leaned off. I do a lot more emails now than I do blogging, but you can sign up for the emails on there. I have another book coming out in just a few weeks on. Book number 2 after book number 1. It's going to be really cool. It's about decision making, and it's all about prayerful decision making.
Very cool.
Decision making is a huge part of life, and trying to do that with God is a good thing. So you can find more information about that at my website, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram and all that. I'm not a huge social media but I am on there. And every once in a while, basically, if it makes me laugh, I will sometimes post it. So you can always find entertaining things from me on there.
And then you also have a podcast.
I do, yeah. So it's the Best Catholic Podcast.
Hey, wait a minute. No, I'm kidding.
The idea being, I'm not the best Catholic. It's certainly the people I interview are not the best Catholics, but we want to help people be the best Catholics they can be. It's kind of a spiritual direction podcast. It's a little bit like how to pray and good advice on stuff to read or scripture passages to pray with. We release episodes about once every couple of months, it's been a lot of fun. So if you want even more great Catholic podcast stuff to listen to, check out the Best Catholic Podcast with Dominick Albano, and all that's also available on my website. All that info's on there.
So we'll send people first and foremost there, and I will put the link to that in the show notes.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. This is a lot of fun, and I'm excited. I think I have 60 pages left in your book, and I'm excited to continue reading this. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, awesome! I really appreciate that. It's it's a real blessing to get to do what we do, and even more so when God says, "And I'm going to have someone pay attention to it." So it's a blessing to get to do it. It's a blessing to have someone pay attention to it, and all glory to God. It's nothing. None of this happens without Him, and it's really all His work in the end. So
that's a very good way of putting it. I'm going to keep that in mind as I go about my own little ministry life here. Okay, so it's the fundamental theory of happiness with Dominick Albano. I'll put links to everything. So listeners, please check this out because I've enjoyed it and I have a very good feeling that you will as well. Okay, until next time, everybody. Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy-to-understand grown-up answers, the pared-down but not talked-down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
WCATradio.com has a show for every interest: apologetics, theology, moral living, and more. Know Your Faith. Please look up my show, Know Your Faith, by logging into WCATradio.com. Then click on Fridays, and that's where you'll find me. Know Your Faith, a show hosted by me, Robert Madrigal, and we'll see you at the show.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.